Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. We'll start with a bit more information about Japan's upgraded Mogami frigate, the main theme of the previous podcast, and I'll shortly do my best to explain once again how this procurement is so screwed up. And we are talking way more than $11 billion for the full scope of the acquisition, and its vital capability caused by two main things: the early retirement of Anzac frigates and the slow pace of the Hunter-class frigate program. But I'll start with a very easy example of a process that is totally illogical. Why does the first ship have to be in the water by 2029? Anyone? Any ideas? Because I can't answer that, and I watch this space fairly closely. Why not 2028 or 2030? There's nothing in the very scant official documents that justifies this decision, which is driving so many aspects of the project. If you want my best guess, this is another reflection of the extent to which the defence planning culture has deteriorated. Someone senior has said, "We must have this capability before the next decade," and everyone else has nodded along, and that has been turned into first ship in 2029. Now, there might be more behind it than that, and I would sincerely hope there is, but I can see no evidence whatsoever of any sort of detailed analysis. Regular listeners would be aware of my preferred solution: morph the construction of Arafura offshore patrol vessels into an order of 6 corvettes of 2,200 tons each, with 16 vertical launch missile cells, naval strike missiles, all of that sort of stuff. It's almost too late for this solution, but if a decision had been taken even a year ago, it would have given the RAN an effective gap filler capability that would have seen 6 brand new warships built in Western Australia with 80% Australian content in service progressively by 2030, at which point local construction of the C-3000 frigates could have started. In other words, this would have been a way of achieving a rolling shipbuilding plan in Western Australia, but instead we will have at least the first 3 general-purpose frigates built in either Japan or Germany. Next, another major flaw in the process. Sorry, this is a little bit of a cracked record because I've talked about the combat management system issue before. Why weren't all of the C-3000 bidders required to include a costed option of the 9LV combat management system in their proposals? It's just one sentence. Where's the harm in asking the question? Why on earth deny decision-makers vital information such as, hypothetically, yes, 9LV could be fitted, but the cost would be an additional $100 million with a 3-month impact on schedule? Instead, and I'm sorry to say, the official line is there's not enough time to fit 9LV, but I know there is because several of the bidders volunteered it as an option, even though they weren't asked to do so. Now, let's go back to the upgraded Mogami and why the defence process makes little to no sense. One of the bedrock provisions of the competition is that the bidders must offer a ship that is in service. Is a Mogami frigate in service? Yeah, certainly. I attended the launch of the 10th ship on December the 19th in Nagasaki. But is the upgraded Mogami in service? No, it isn't, because it is not yet under contract. Will it be in service with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force? You bet it will be, in about 2028. However, that would seem to be outside the rules, with the insistence that the ship be in service now. However, think about this for 5 minutes, which the Naval Surface Fleet Review and the government's response to it and the Department of Defence apparently have not done. Japan builds highly capable warships fast, and this means that to deliver the Australian ship in 2029, it will need to be launched in 2028. So with me so far? Okay, by then, the original Mogami, that's the one that's 133 metres long, and with a maximum of 16 VLS cells will be out of production. The only ship that Japan can possibly offer is the upgraded version that's 145 metres long with 32 VLS cells and a number of other very attractive features. The official Department of Defence media release that accompanied the news of the shortlisting, this was that the Mogami FFM had been shortlisted, not the upgraded Mogami. It incorrectly shows the 133-metre profile of the wrong ship. Is this issue complicated? I don't think it is. Imagine going to Boeing and saying, I would like to order 3 Boeing 737-200 aircraft. They would look at you as if you were insane and explain that aircraft went out of production years ago and that the only ones you can order are the ones currently in production. They aren't going to restart the old production line just for a customer that gets it into their head that they want a model that they are now no longer building. That's the reality with defence having to twist itself in knots, saying that the Mogami FFM has been shortlisted because that's the in-service design, while at the same time it's apparent to everyone that is not the ship that Australia will get. Japan itself has been very open about all of this, so I'm not sure why defence still seems confused. People have asked me where does this leave ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems and the MEKO 200, which is the other shortlisted design, and also the possibility of the company offering a derivative of that ship, namely the larger, much more powerful MEKO A210. These are good questions, and I have to try and answer them with zero input from defence, because of course the cloak of absolute secrecy has to be maintained. It's also without any input from tkMS themselves, whose staff could literally be jailed for discussing the Australian requirement. However, I've been around for a while, and there are sources of information in countries other than Australia. The first thing to be said is that the latest version of the MEKO 200 family is the one being delivered to Egypt. It's 122 metres long and 3,800 tonnes, so a lot smaller than the upgraded Mogami. It's a powerful ship with an interesting propulsion system using smaller than normal propellers and a big water jet. Highly unusual, but I'm told very effective. It has all of the things that you would expect: an embarked helicopter, vertical launch missiles, 5-inch gun, also very long range. I would like to be able to talk about it more, but here we run into a very powerful, very important disconnect. The Japanese government can talk quite freely about the Mogami because they are talking about the ship that they are buying, strictly speaking, not the one for Australia. However, since the one for Australia is almost exactly the same, it doesn't make much practical difference. However, the customer for the latest MEKO 200 is the Egyptian government. Would they like to talk about their ship to Australian journalists? No. Why would they? There's no direct connection with Australia. Diplomatic relations are okay, but nothing special. There's no military-to-military cooperation that I'm aware of. Also, on the other part of the equation, ThyssenKrupp themselves are bound by the usual restrictions based on customer requirements, and so they're a bit limited about what they can also say about the ship. Could they organise for journalists to go on board the ships? Absolutely not, unless the government of Egypt agreed, and as I've said, there seems to be no incentive for them to do so. While I assume the upgraded Mogami will only have some changes for Australia, the MEKO needs more from the Egyptian configuration because that uses a lot of European missiles and sensors. For example, the MICA, M-I-C-A, for surface-to-air engagements, and Exocets for surface strike. These are all excellent missiles, but of course the RAN won't look at them because they don't have the stars and stripes painted on their side. Does this mean, therefore, that the MEKO 200 modified for the RAN is riskier than the upgraded Mogami. Well, absolutely not, because the MEKO 200 is a highly flexible modular design. We know this because the Anzac frigates being retired from service are themselves MEKO designs, with all 10 ships built in Australia and in the RAN configuration based around the Mark 41 vertical launch missile cell, the Saab 9LV combat management system, and a radar suite from Canberra-based CEA Technologies. And because the upgraded Mogami is much larger than the MEKO 200, and because it's not yet in production, by the same process of logic, could ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems offer an upgraded MEKO in the form of a ship called the A210? This is a concept ship, I would say, closer in size and capability to the upgraded Mogami. Now, for me, this is an interesting and very important question, but not one that I can answer because I have absolutely no idea what Defence and the RAN are thinking. I would be surprised if even they know. It's a kind of what's good for the goose is good for the gander argument. If Japan can offer a ship not yet under contract, but based on an existing design, why can't Germany offer an upgraded ship based on an existing design? And I'll make this snide observation. Since Defence and the RAN have made such a total mess of the Arafura OPVs, a small, simple ship of 1,600 tons, what hope have they got of managing a large, complex undertaking such as this one? And complexity, as I've done my best to explain, is caused mainly because of their own lack of homework, such as not understanding you can't order a ship that's out of production, at least not without having a major impact on cost and schedule. What's going to happen with this project? I have absolutely no idea. Seriously, if I were tkMS, and as regular listeners know, I worked on the original Anzac frigate bid as part of their team, my advice to them is this. Unless Defence and the government allow you to talk about your Australian proposal, pull out of the competition. Save yourselves tens of millions of euro and a lot of wasted time. Of course, it would be prudent to discuss this with Defence first. Explain that you cannot compete directly with the government of Japan for the reasons I've outlined. It's totally ridiculous that this information ban has been put in place to begin with, and unless it's lifted, I would honestly walk away from this deal. Unless tkMS and Germany can speak about the details of what they can do, they will be overwhelmed by Japan Inc. As I've been doing my best to explain, the offer from Japan looks extremely attractive, and there's a huge amount of enthusiasm for the deal in Japan and also at a high level in Australia. At the moment, to me, it's not looking like an even competition. A further indicator will be whether the A210 will even be considered. If Defence say no to that when they've already said yes to the upgraded Mogami, this will be further and, for me, final clinching evidence that this is not a fair fight and that Japan has already been preferred. If that is the case, I certainly won't complain. But Defence and the government should make that announcement now, not drag this out unnecessarily for another 12 months or more. The next set of deliverables from the bidders is scheduled in mid-February. I'm not meant to know that, and people could be jailed if my sources could be located, which itself is an indication of just how awful this process is. Anyway, after that mid-February deadline, there will be a small window of opportunity for the government to announce Japan is the winner before everything goes into caretaker mode for the forthcoming federal election. And speaking of elections, we are a week away from the swearing-in of US President Donald Trump for the second time. And I put this question to our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Defence Minister Richard Marles, and Foreign Minister Penny Wong. If our great and powerful ally asks for Australian military support for their forthcoming invasions of Greenland, Canada and Panama, what will our response be? Presumably, it will be in the affirmative, since the military alliance with the US and the still secret parts of the AUKUS agreement has become the defining feature of Australian foreign policy. I'm surprised that President Trump's territorial ambitions have received so little coverage in Australia. I bet if China's President Xi started making noises about the military takeover of 3 regional nations, you'd be hearing a lot more about it. But he obviously does talk about taking over free and democratic Taiwan. But imagine the ruckus if, for example, he added the Philippines and Thailand to that list. Do I think the US will actually take over these countries? Almost certainly probably not, though it's a sad commentary on the state of the world and of US politics in particular that no one could rule that option out with 100% certainty. Am I a believer in the US alliance? You bet I am. Am I a believer in the alliance at any cost? Well, obviously not. There have to be limits. But unfortunately, that's something our defence establishment and our politicians lost sight of a very long time ago. And while on the US, I'll wrap up this podcast by circling back to one of my favourite themes, AUKUS, well, in particular AUKUS Pillar 1, nuclear-powered submarines. And a couple of days ago, there was an article from Joe Kelly, the Australian newspaper's correspondent in Washington, D.C. I know Joe very well. Joe's a personal friend. He's an excellent journalist. The story that he wrote, big page 1 story, I thought rather missed the point, and that was once again explaining that Democrats and Republicans in Congress have united to show their support for the AUKUS agreement and for the alliance with Australia. Now, all of that's well and good, better to have bipartisan support rather than not have it at all. However, as I keep on trying to remind people, explain to people, this is really not the important part of the equation. The 2 really important parts of the equation are, first of all, will the US be able to lift the rate of production of Virginia-class submarines to a sufficient number, 2.33 per year, to allow second-hand boats to be sold to Australia, and will a future US president approve of the sale, which has to take place on the basis that it will not weaken the capabilities of the United States Navy. Now, I have my profound doubts that either of those hurdles will be jumped. We now know, as a result of Congress agreeing to the extra US $5.7 billion worth of emergency funding, mainly for the Virginia production line, but also the Columbia ballistic missile firing submarines, that money budget is no longer the issue. The US is pouring huge amounts into this. What is at question is whether the US industrial base just has the capacity to ramp up to that level of production. I see a lot of warning signs. I have my doubts, but we are going to find out, I think, pretty for sure, one way or another during the term of President Donald Trump. If the production rate has not substantially increased by 2027 or 2028, despite this enormous amount of money being tipped into the system, I think then we conclude it just ain't going to happen. Australian planners need to start thinking now about what happens if that target can't be achieved. Okay, I didn't have much of a break over Christmas with the podcasts. I've got a long weekend coming up. I'm just taking some personal leave, and then we have the Australia Day long weekend after that. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of a rest, and I'll record my next podcast early in February with the normal qualification. Should anything dramatic happen in the meantime, I'll certainly be reporting on that. Thank you for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.